Hey, everybody, it's Robert F. Kennedy Jr. I want to thank all of my fellow boomers who submitted questions here today. If I don't address a subject that you are interested in, please submit another round of questions at kennedy24.com/boomers-4-Kennedy. Your question may be answered in another virtual town hall event. Now, let's look at the first question.
Hi, Robert. My name is Rich Stevens. I live in San Diego, California. And I would like you to be our next president, but I worry about the people I meet who say he's the best one, but it's just a way to vote. An independent never wins. What can we do to get you to become president with those kind of feelings about independents never win?
So there's a lot of Americans out there like you, Rich, who want to vote for me, but are not doing so out of fear. And what, my task is to persuade Americans that they can vote out of hope, out of inspiration for somebody that they like, that they think is actually going to change our country for the better, rather than having to vote out of fear.
Mr. Kennedy, I've been a clinical pharmacist in Missouri for 35 years. You've chaired the Children's Health Defense, a nonprofit organization that focuses on anti-vaccine messaging. And you've been vocal about your concerns regarding vaccines and their safety. Can you elaborate on why you believe that vaccines pose a significant risk, despite scientific consensus that supports their safe and efficacious use in preventing diseases?
Tracy, thanks so much for that question. What I've said for 20 years, a lot of the term anti-vax is applied to me as a pejorative by people who want to silence me. I've never been anti-vaccine, and I've said this for 20 years, that I want safe vaccines, and I want a regulatory agency that is not does not have corrupting entanglements with the pharmaceutical companies who are making these products. I also think that vaccines should not have a shield from liability. If a vaccine company acts negligently, if they act recklessly, and if an individual is injured, that person ought to be able to sue them. The reason for that is because the threat of those kind of laws is in some cases the only thing that keeps pharmaceutical companies honest. The 4 pharmaceutical companies that make all 72 of the vaccines that are now mandated for our children, those companies have paid about $79 billion in criminal penalties over the past 20 years because for products other than vaccines, for their other products, for lying, for cheating, for falsifying science, and for killing hundreds of thousands of Americans. But Vioxx alone killed between 120,000 and 500,000. That was made by Merck, which is the biggest vaccine maker in our country. And the difference is you can sue them. They get caught when they're doing that with other products, but they'll never get caught with vaccines because nobody can sue them. So you can't get discovery. And that gives those companies a perverse incentive to not make improvements. The other problem is that vaccines are given to healthy people. So, our tolerance for risk from the vaccine itself for side effects should be much lower than if they were given to sick people. And vaccines don't, the market does not keep people honest because there is no free market, because this is a product that doesn't have to pay any advertising costs. They don't have to pay any marketing costs because the federal government is mandating the consumption of that product by 76 million American kids. So it's a lot of money. It's billions of dollars if you can get that vaccine on this schedule. And the other problem with vaccines is it's the only medical product that is exempt from pre-licensing safety testing. And the reason for that is the vaccine program was originally initiated by the Public Health Service, which is the predatory agency or the predecessor agency to CDC. And the Public Health Service is a military, quasi-military agency. It's one of the 5 uniform military services. The vaccine program was initiated originally as a national security defense against biological attacks on our country. So they wanted to make sure that if the Russians attacked us with anthrax or some other biological agent, that we could quickly develop a vaccine, deploy it to 280 million Americans without regulatory impediments. And they recognize that medical products have to go through years of testing, placebo-controlled trials, usually 5 to 7 years, to make sure that side effects, every medical product has side effects. And some of those side effects have long incubation periods or long diagnostic horizons, and you won't see them for years. So the government, the FDA, requires long-term testing, but they felt they didn't want to have to do that with vaccines because of the emergency, the potential emergency of a biological attack on our country. So they said, if we call it a medical product, we're gonna have to go through 5 or 7 years of testing. So let's call it something else. We'll call it a biologic, and we will exempt biologics from safety studies. So vaccines are the only product that don't have to go through pre-licensing placebo-controlled trials prior to licensure. And none of the 72 vaccines that are now on our schedule for our children mandated have ever gone through pre-licensing safety trials. And I think that's a big problem. And I know as a pharmacist, you'll think that's a problem too, because that means we don't really know what the risk profile is for that product. We don't know if that product is actually going to avert more problems than it causes. And, vaccines work. Many vaccines work very well in preventing a disease, a target disease. For example, the measles vaccine definitely prevents measles. But we don't know whether it actually makes you healthier. And there are many studies out there that show that catching measles when you're young protects you later in life against cancers, against atopic disease, against cardiac diseases. And these are peer-reviewed studies. Nobody's ever done the assessment about the long-term effects and the long-term benefits and measure those against each other. And we all ought to have that information. We ought to know it. Our physicians ought to know it. I've never been against vaccines, but there's a certain group of people that are injured by vaccines. Like every medical product, it causes injuries and it causes death. And the vaccine courts have paid out billions of dollars to people who have been injured or killed by vaccines. And what I have focused on is that cohort. If you want a vaccine, if it's working for you, I will never stop you from getting it. But I want to make sure that the people who get injured, that they're not gaslighted, that they're not silenced, they're not censored, they're able to talk about what's happening, even if it's rare. If a child gets a rare cancer, we take care of them and we listen to them. And if people get vaccine injuries that are rare, we should do the same with them. We shouldn't force them to the sidelines and then, and deny them compensation. And we don't allow them to sue the vaccine maker. So a lot of these people end up really suffering terribly. And my focus is on that group. And, then I think the other place where I differ from some people is I don't think vaccines or any medical intervention should be mandated. I think that Americans, my default position is always towards freedom. We should have informed choice. People should understand the costs and benefits. And if the benefits are enormous, people are going to line up to get that intervention. We shouldn't have government mandating. We can't trust our government. We saw this during COVID to mandate. I want to point out, because this morning a study came out that is published in the International Journal of Vaccine Theory, Practice and Research, a high gravitas peer-reviewed journal. And that study shows that infants who receive multiple vaccines at once are exponentially at greater risk for disease development and developmental for infectious disease and developmental delays. So This study indicates that the more vaccines you get in a single sitting on a wellness visit, and the authors of this study are Hooker and Jablonowski. They're both PhDs, and so that there are many studies like that, and I think those studies are studies that physicians should know about, that that NIH should be doing. And when I get into the president's office, I'm not going to deny anybody access to vaccines. I'm going to make sure that the vaccines, the interactions, are studied, and that we know as much as we can about them. And I think anybody who's interested in public health will support that position. And thank you for the question.
Hi, Mr. Kennedy. This is Robin Milne, and I'm an avid supporter from California. My question is about Social Security. I have a millennial and a Gen Xer, and they both told me they don't think they're going to get Social Security. Could you say something about those of us that are now just getting ready to take Social Security and worried about their inflationary limited income, and also to the point of what Gen Xers and millennials and even Gen Zs are worried about, that they won't have Social Security for themselves? Thank you.
Yeah, Robin, thank you for that question. I think you're right to worry about the impacts of inflation devaluing your Social Security checks. I think your kids, the Generation X and millennials, have really good reason to be very worried about whether they're ever going to get Social Security, or whether the system is going to collapse before they get to the age when they can collect. And I think the principal threat is inflation, but also the fact that the inflation is driven mainly by the military expenditures and by expenditures on chronic disease. The military is now, we were told that the military in 1992 that we were going to get a peace dividend. The military was going to be scaled back to $200 billion from $600 billion. Instead, today we're spending about $1.3 trillion if you include the $950 billion military budget, plus the DOE, the Department of Energy, and Department of Veterans Affairs, and the National Security Establishment. And it is destroying our country. It is that the perpetual wars are hurting other countries. Every country that we fought a war in is worse off than we found it. We're losing our friends abroad. We're seeing the rise of BRICS, which is going to further undermine the American dollar by attacking its status as the world reserve currency, as the world's trade currency, as the world's safe haven. And we're already seeing many nations begin to unload their dollars. And when that happens, there's going to be a cascading effect, and we're going to see inflation catch up with all the money printing that we've been doing. Inflation is theft. It's a way for politicians to pay for projects that they, for vanity projects like wars. So they don't have to come to us in advance and say, oh, I'm going to make a war, I'm going to overthrow Saddam Hussein, or I'm going to make a war in Ukraine. And your children are going to be less educated, they're going to have less opportunity, your bills are going to be higher, and we're going to take a bigger chunk of your income to pay for it. If they had to do that in advance, we wouldn't have any wars. The only war we would have had is World War II. In the last 100 years, we wouldn't have had any other wars if people had to pay for it in advance. But instead, what they do is they don't even declare war anymore. They just start a war, and then they print the money. And they don't have to ask our permission. They just start printing it. And that devalues the money in your Social Security check. It is theft. It's an attack. It's a regressive tax, and it's an attack on the poor and on people with fixed incomes. I'm going to unravel the military-industrial complex. I'm going to unravel the war machine. I'm going to close many of the 800 bases that we have abroad. I'm going to give America better protection at home around its borders. I'm going to make us too expensive to ever invade. We can protect the sea lanes, the neutral areas like the Antarctic. We can have a two-strike capacity elsewhere in the world. A much more effective military for half the price. And that's what I'm going to do. And then I'm going to wind down the chronic disease epidemic, which is affecting now 60% of Americans. And we can end it. We can end it very quickly, and that's costing us $4.3 trillion a year. That's 5 times our military budget. Not only can we end it, we have to, because Social Security is not it's not a charity. It's not a philanthropy. It's an entitlement. It's a contract. You worked all your life and you gave money to your account with the promise that that was going to be paid back to you. And now the government is going to default on that commitment, not under my watch. But we've had other priorities in our country, and now the Social Security system is on the edge of insolvency, and we can still save it, but we need to act quickly. And I don't think any other presidential candidate is going to do that. But for me, it's a top priority.
Good morning, Mr. Kennedy. You have publicly stated that the war on drugs has failed and that you support decriminalization of drugs. What evidence do you have to support your position? Can you imagine how America would have turned out far worse, in my opinion, had America not made drug abuse and distribution illegal? I look forward to your response. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Wade. My position is not that drugs ought to be all legalized. My position is that that using the only tool that we have for drug use and addiction in this country is in law enforcement and imprisonment, and that is a failure. And the evidence for that failure is that drug addiction is increasing exponentially in this country. And the overdose deaths in the last 12 months are 107,000. That's double the number of American kids who died from overdoses in the last year and died in the entire 20-year Vietnam War. So that is a failure. The Vietnam War itself was a failure, and this is 40 times the failure. And I'm going to change those policies so that we treat addiction like a disease, and that we offer people treatment for it rather than having imprisonment as the first recourse and the first reaction to all to addiction issues. There are over half the people in our jails today. Those prisons are costing us, on average, about $30,000 a year per prisoner. And many of them are nonviolent drug offenders who have a disease, and we should be treating that disease. We can do it a lot cheaper in rehabs, I've offered as my big Peace Corps or moonshot program that I'm going to build rehabilitation farms, restoration farms, all over our country today. The biggest industry in rural areas in America is prisons. I'm going to change that. I'm going to build farms where this entire generation of kids that we're losing, they're dispossessed, they're feeling alienated, they're marginalized, they're atomized, and this discontent that they are experiencing today, this epidemic of mental illness, of disease, of addiction, of alcoholism, of suicide, that is ravaging our youth, is amplified by social media algorithms that drive us further and further apart and skew our priorities and destroy any human links or any notion of community. And I'm going to create these farms. I'm going to fund them through a tax on marijuana. Right now, marijuana is legal in many states. The people are buying and selling it. There's dispensaries all over our country today. But the federal government still has it as a Schedule 1, which means the federal government cannot collect taxes on it. Now, I'm going to change it. I'm going to recognize the reality that's there, that it's already legal in these states, and I'm going to begin taxing it. And that's about $8.5 billion a year. I'm going to direct that tax to treating addiction. So it's not a new expense. It's something that's going to pay for itself. And I'm going to create these farms where the kids will come together. They'll grow organic, high quality food on the farms. There'll be no screens, no cell phones, no computers. They'll learn trades. They will leave with a job. They'll learn how to be electricians, how to be carpenters, how to be HVAC engineers, and plumbers. And this is based upon a model in Italy called San Patrignano's, which is one of these farms with has 2,000 people there, and they come away transformed, and it's free. And I have a family member who attended it and came out absolutely transformed. And there are a number of places already that I've been visiting over the past 12 months. We have a film, a documentary that we just released about the drug problem in our country, and our campaign just released, and a lot of it is about visiting these farms, and not only to get off of illegal drugs, but also to get off of some of the prescription, the psychiatric drugs like SSRIs and benzos and Adderall, because this whole generation is addicted to pharmaceuticals and illegal drugs in a way that we've never seen before. And I want to stop that. I want to do it in a way that's, the Omnibus Drug Act that was passed in 1994, it was skewed toward black people, black Americans. It had, for example, it had 1986, it had a penalty for cocaine, for crack cocaine, that was 100 times the penalty for powder cocaine. Powder cocaine was normally used by white kids and crack cocaine by black kids, and yet it had 100 times the penalty. And that law doubled that law in the 1994 Omnibus Crime Bill with the super predator provisions and the 3 strikes you're out and the mandatory sentencing, doubled the amount of black Americans in prisons, and it absolutely ravaged black communities in our country. And to me, drug crime should be treated differently than violent crime, than robberies, than burglaries, than theft, than the beatings, all that kind of stuff. Drug addiction is a disease, and we should be treating it and welcoming addicts back into our society, giving them a path out of addiction, an off-ramp from addiction, and let's go and reclaim this generation of kids rather than throwing them away by putting them in prison. You go to prison, and it's hard ever to recover from that. Your life is ruined. You're stigmatized. You can't get a job. You can't vote in many states, and you come out traumatized. And I want to do something differently. I want a different plan, a plan that will reclaim America's young people.
How will you get this country out of its enormous debt?
Christine, thank you for that question. To me, the debt is it's an existential crisis for our country. The debt today is $34 trillion and climbing. The service on that debt, in other words, just paying the interest that debt is now costing us more than our entire military budget. Within 5 years, 50 cents out of every dollar that we collect in taxes is going to go to servicing that debt. Within 10 years, 100%. That is existential. That's something that is not sustainable. And unfortunately, President Trump and President Biden are not treating this as an important issue. And they can't, because President Trump in his 4 short years in office ran up an $8 trillion bill, spent $8 trillion. He spent more money in 4 years than every president from George Washington to George W. Bush combined over 283 years of American history. In 4 short years, Donald Trump outspent them all. After coming into office, promising the American public that he was going to balance the budget. President Biden, in his 3.5 years, already spent $6.3 trillion. He will beat President Trump. He will spend more than $8 trillion. He is adding $1 trillion every 90 days to that debt. And it's going to destroy our country. It is going to destroy us. And we need to stop it. And the only way to stop it is we've got to wind down our military. We've got to cut our military budget in half, which I will do. And I'll leave us with a stronger military. And we have to get rid of the chronic disease epidemic, because that is $4.3 trillion. It's 5 times our military budget. And then I'm going to use AI to identify ways throughout the American government, AI and blockchain, to make everything transparent, all expenditures visible, so we can all be involved in attacking ways, so that every American will be able to see every expenditure of every agency, and we won't be buying $16,000 toilet seats. Last week the Pentagon budget came out, and it failed its audit for the 20th year in a row. The Pentagon failed its audit, and the auditors admitted that the Pentagon had lost $4 trillion. Lost. And they said it's in inventory that we can't find. So, and they acknowledged that oftentimes they would buy the same item over and over and over again. And these are not small items. These could be jets that are worth, $500 million. But they're buying them again and again and again because they can't find the one that they bought before. They don't know if they have it. They don't know where it is. And we can use, what I'm going to do is I'm going to use AI walkers to go through all of our stockpiles and identify where everything is. And we can use AI to cut waste throughout the federal government. And I'm going to do that. And I'm going to deploy blockchain. And I'm also going to bring AI and blockchain into this country because we cannot cut our way alone out of the debt. We have to cut our budget. We have to live within our means. But we also have to have an industry here that can grow our economy so that the budget deficits become proportionally smaller. And those industries, that's what we did with Silicon Valley. When we owned that industry, we were able to grow our way out of our debt at that time. We need to do the same thing now, and the industries that we can do that with are blockchain and AI, and we are doing the opposite. President Biden has implemented all of these policies. President Trump did the same thing when he was in office. They've made a war on blockchain, on cryptocurrencies. They're driving them offshore. In the last 2 years, Switzerland has registered 1,200 new cryptocurrencies. They have a capitalized value of $360 billion. That money should be here in our country, and all of the entrepreneurs and innovators and engineers, the best in the world, are being driven offshore to Switzerland, to China, to Dubai, to Qatar, all of these other countries that are welcoming blockchain, and we should be doing that here. AI is the same. We need to regulate AI. AI is very dangerous. It has great promise and great peril. The promise is that the American people will have a much more visible government and be able to use it to make their government much more transparent and establish their sovereignty over it. The danger is that the government and intelligence agencies will use AI to enslave the American people, and that AI ultimately will do that on its own. Elon Musk has said about AI that first it's going to steal our job, then it's going to kill us. And, AI is already lying to us, and it's doing things that are very, very frightening. We need to keep the hub of AI in this country. We can't afford to drive it to Iran, to China, to Russia, and to other countries, to North Korea. We need to keep it here, so you can't overregulate it. You can't chase it out of the country. We need to welcome it. We need to we need to devise ways of regulating it, and we need to reach agreements with countries all over the world, including countries that we don't like Russia and China, to make sure we're all on the same page and that AI does not get beyond human control. And we need a president who's in office, who's thinking about this 24 hours a day, because this is the future. And, and it's an existential threat to humanity. And it's so important for our country to recognize that this is the future. So those ultimately are the pathways. They're the off-ramp from this catastrophic debt. But, we need a president who understands how to make that work.
I'm Scott McElprine from Arizona. There are lots of conservatives that desperately want the governmental reforms that you promise, and there are reasons to believe that you are singularly willing and able to execute those reforms. How can you satisfy their concerns over other elements of your platform, which sound like more socialism and government giveaways paid for by tax-paying Americans? Conservative boomers don't want to vote for more socialism. They want less government and lower taxes.
Hey, Scott, thank you for the question. I believe in small government. I believe in deregulation, and I believe in free market capitalism. Right now, and for 40 years, if you look at my speeches on the environment, my approach has always been a market-based approach. And that's why the libertarians like me, because that's what I've talked about for many, many years. I don't like top-down regulation of the environment. I like to end the subsidies. Right now, we don't have free market capitalism in our country, and that's really bad for democracy. We have corporate crony capitalism. We have this very, very cushy kind of socialism for the rich, and a brutal, barbaric monopoly capitalism for the poor that keeps them poor. And I want to change that. I want to have real, true free market capitalism in this country. And, when it comes to the environment, for example, the best thing, I've argued for years, the best thing for the environment is if we had true free market capitalism, because a free market promotes efficiency, and efficiency means the elimination of waste, and pollution is waste. A free market would encourage us to properly value our natural resources, and it's the undervaluation of those resources that cause us to use them wastefully. In a true free market, you can't make yourself rich without making your neighbors rich and without enriching your community. But what polluters do is they make themselves rich by making everybody else poor. They raise standards of living for themselves by lowering quality of life for the rest of us, and they do that by escaping the discipline of the free market. You show me a polluter, I'll show you a subsidy. I'll show you a fat cat using political clout to escape the discipline of the free market and force the public to pay his production costs. That's what all pollution is. It's always a subsidy, and I want it. It's a company or corporation or an actor in the market that is externalizing one of the costs of bringing its product to market. In a true free market, the actors in the market pay all the costs of bringing that product to market, including the cost of cleaning up their mess, which is a lesson we were supposed to have learned in kindergarten. What polluters do is they figure out ways to externalize the costs. They dump their pollution into the river illegally. They put it into the air so that it causes health care injuries to the American public. I'll give you an example with coal plants. The coal industry is cutting down the Appalachian Mountains now. It's illegal. You're not allowed to cut down a whole mountain and to get the coal seams beneath with this mountaintop removal technology and then leave a dump behind, which is what they do. It's against the law. They filled 2,200 miles of rivers and streams, which is all illegal. They're externalizing their costs. They're poisoning the waterways and the drinking water in the aquifer of eastern Kentucky and in West Virginia, and they're forcing the public to shoulder their costs of their production. Then coal burning plants release mercury into the atmosphere. They couldn't remove it, but they don't, because the EPA lets them get away with it. and that mercury gets into our fish. 100% of the freshwater fish in America now have dangerous levels of mercury in their flesh. They're externalizing their costs. The acid rain from those plants has destroyed the forest cover on the high peaks of the Appalachian from Georgia to northern Quebec. Where I grew up in the Adirondacks, the oldest protected wilderness in the country, in the world. And 20% of the lakes in the Adirondacks are now sterilized from acid rain. Well, that is a cost of the industry that they're not paying, that they're concealing, that they're externalizing. Coal-burning power plants release ozone and particulates that cause about $500 billion in respiratory illnesses every year. So if we were paying the true cost of coal, it wouldn't be 16 cents a kilowatt hour. It'd be about 60 or 80 cents a kilowatt hour if they were actually internalizing those costs, and nobody would be buying coal power. Instead, they'd go for the cheaper forms of energy. Right now, it costs about $1 billion to build a solar plant. It costs $3.6 billion to build a coal plant. When you build a solar plant, it's free energy forever because the electrons are hitting the Earth every day for free. When you build that coal plant, now you've put in 4 times as much money, and now you got to go get the coal, blow up the mountains, move it across the country, poison the air, poison the water, poison the people, cause all these respiratory injuries that are billions, hundreds of billions, trillions of dollars, and we pay for it, not them. And what I'm going to do is end the subsidies. And right now we give about $5.2 trillion a year in subsidies to the carbon industry. I want to end to the oil industry alone. I want to end those subsidies so so the true costs are reflected in the price at the marketplace. We're paying those costs. You're just paying them out of a different pocket, out of your medical bills or whatever. And I want to change that and then have true free markets and let the marketplace dictate our energy use, and with cost as a principal consideration. In doing that, we'll get a much cleaner environment.
I'm Lynn Wainfan from Flint, Michigan. Mr. Kennedy, I wasn't going to vote for you. Then I realized I'm making these decisions out of fear, and I don't want to do that. And I thought of the last time I was completely fearless, and that was when I was a little kid playing outdoors with my friends, man from Uncle, fighting injustice. And I have some of those friends for 56 years now. So my question to you is, how do we get these kids off their screens and get them outdoors to play with their friends? Thank you.
Oh, Lynn, that's such a great question. And, that's something I think about all the time, and particularly about raising kids that are fearless, that we're not imbuing them with we're not wrapping them in bubble wrap all the time. And, we're getting them outdoors. When I was a kid, my parents would lock us outdoors in the morning and say, don't come back until it's dark. And we weren't allowed in the house. And we went out and played, and we climbed trees and climbed rocks and swam in the streams and in the ponds, local ponds. And it made us, and our parents encouraged us to be fearless. And they understood that was part of our American heritage, that we were the land of the free because we're the home of the brave, and now we're being told to just be fearful of everything, be fearful of disease, of bugs, of viruses, of everything. And, Franklin Roosevelt in 1932, in his speech before the Democratic Convention, gave this famous speech where he said the only thing America had to fear was fear itself. And the reason he said that was because it was the beginning of the Great Depression, and 30% of this people in this country had lost faith in capitalism, and they wanted to go towards socialism and communism. Another 30% had lost faith in capitalism, and they wanted to go to communism. They feared. They were filled with fear. The system was broken and didn't work. And Roosevelt saw what was happening in Europe, where demagogues were rising from the left and the right, and they were using fear to get people to relinquish their constitutional rights in Germany, in Italy, and Spain. Right-wing dictators were on the rise and generating fear. In Eastern Europe, it was left-wing dictators, but they were all using fear of the Depression to get people to relinquish democracy and walk away from capitalism. And Roosevelt said, we're not going to do that here. We're going to be calm. We're going to be optimistic. And we're going to be absolutely fearless. And he was able to restore confidence in capitalism over the next 2 or 3 years. My grandfather served with them. My grandfather was the first head of the Securities and Exchange Commission, and they calmed Wall Street, and they gave Americans faith again that the little guy was not going to get robbed on Wall Street, that it was not, just a casino, a fixed casino for the rich, which it had been prior to 1929. And they were able to restore faith in our country, and people started putting their money, taking the money out of the mattresses and putting it back in the banks. And then, we produced the generation, the greatest generation that won World War II. And it's all about being fearless, and then built this country into the richest country in the world. When I was a kid, we owned half the wealth on the face of the earth. America was the land of the free, the home of the brave. The American middle class was the greatest economic engine in the history of mankind. And we've lost all that today. And a lot of it is because we're listening to people who are orchestrating fear and manipulating us. And I'm going to put an end to that as president.
My name is Laura Palmer. I am from Ohio. Mr. Kennedy, my question is, if we were to be, in fact, faced with war where our only option was to engage with another country, what would your stance be? Thank you.
Well, my position on war is that I'm against war. But if it's a defensive war that's critical to our national security, my job as president is to defend the country. And if we're attacked by another nation, that's what we would do. So, our problem is that we look for wars. We've got the intelligence agency, the CIA, and the NSA that have become captured by the military-industrial complex. And their job is to provide a constant pipeline of new wars for our country to fight. We've spent $8 trillion in 20 years on regime change wars that all ended up with those countries worse off than we found them. In Iraq, for example, we overthrew a dictator, Saddam Hussein, but Iraq is much worse off than we found it. We killed more Iraqis than Saddam Hussein. So we left that country an incoherent collection of Shia and Sunni death squads. We pushed Iraq into a proxy posture with Iran, which is exactly the foreign policy outcome that we've been trying to avoid for 20 years. We created ISIS. We drove 4 million refugees up into Europe and destabilized every nation in Europe for the next generations. A direct result of that was Brexit. Britain leaving the European Union. All of these impacts. We spent 20 years bombing bridges, roads, ports, and schools. The Chinese spent $8 trillion in the same period building roads, ports, schools, universities, hospitals, and they made friends all over the globe and important alliances. The Chinese are now the principal creditor in Latin America and almost every nation in Africa. And they've created BRICS, which is now challenging America as the world's reserve currency, and they've gotten stronger and stronger, and we've gotten weaker through our addiction to war. I think the only war that we fought in the last 100 years that was a moral war, which was a defensive war, was World War II. All of the other wars were wars of choice, and they're immoral wars. And I will only fight moral wars that are critical to America's national security. But when the time comes to fight, then, I will lead that battle.
Hello, Mr. Kennedy. This is Christine from Utah, and my question is, how, as president, would you help promote defending the United States Constitution and traditional family values? Thank you.
Thank you very much for that question, Christine. This is absolutely essential. We've seen an unprecedented attack on our Constitution over the past 3 or 4 years, and particularly during COVID. We saw a censorship of speech. We saw federal agencies cooperating, pressuring social media companies to censor speech, not only on COVID countermeasures, but then on a whole broad range of issues. Once they opened that door, they began doing it on a lot of different issues. During COVID, we saw all the churches. The other plank in the First Amendment is freedom of worship. Yet we saw every church in this country closed for a year with no due process, no scientific citation, no environmental impact statement, no science to tell us that that actually was good or important. And then we saw the third leg of the First Amendment is freedom of assembly. And we saw these social distancing regulations that obliterated that. And now, in the last 3 weeks, Anthony Fauci and Dr. Redfield and Dr. Birx have all admitted that the social distancing regulations were completely scientifically baseless, that they just pulled them out of, Dr. Fauci said they came from somewhere, I don't know where. There was no scientific study, and yet it was a direct assault on our Constitution. They then went after the Fifth Amendment, the property rights. They closed 3.3 million businesses with no due process, no just compensation, which is illegal under the Fifth Amendment. They then went after the Seventh Amendment, which is the guarantee of jury trials. The Seventh Amendment says no American shall be denied the right of a trial before a jury of his peers in cases or controversies exceeding $25. That's all it says. There's no pandemic exception. And by the way, the framers knew all about epidemics. There were 2 epidemics in the Revolution: a malaria epidemic that decimated the armies of Virginia, a smallpox epidemic that decimated the Army of New England at the very time when Benedict Arnold had captured Montreal. And he had to withdraw his troops because he didn't have the troop strength, because his men were down with smallpox. Otherwise, Canada today would be part of the United States. And all the framers knew that. And there were epidemics in every city between the end of the Revolution and the beginning of the ratification of the Bill of Rights, in cholera, malaria, yellow fever, that killed tens of thousands of people. So they knew all about them, and they did not put an epidemic exception in the Constitution. And we need to remember that. We need to remember that the Constitution was written for hard times. The First Amendment was not written to protect speech that everybody likes. It was written to protect speech that nobody wants to hear, the unpopular speech. And we need to start fighting again to protect our constitutional rights. And one of the things I'm going to do is to reinstate civics classes in our schools, because I think one of the reasons we relinquish those rights so easily is because we have generations of kids that haven't been taught civics, haven't been taught that always is the beginning of totalitarian rule. There is no time in history when we look back and say the people who were censoring speech were the good guys. We read as kids, we read Aldous Huxley and George Orwell and Alexander Solzhenitsyn and Robert Heinlein and all these other authors who always told us the beginning of totalitarian rule is the censorship of speech. And it's a betrayal of our democracy, but everybody seemed to go along with it. And I'm going to return civics lessons to American schools so that all of us know that, we have to fight every generation. Thomas Jefferson said that every generation, if they want to hold on to these rights, has to water the tree of liberty with its own blood. He didn't mean you had to, we had to die, but what he meant was we had to be aware and we had to fight those rights. And I think every American kid needs to be taught we have to fight, we have to be willing to die for these rights the same way that they did in the Revolution to give us these rights. There's a whole generation that gave up their property, their status, their salaries, their freedom, their lives to give us these constitutional rights. And, I want to teach this next generation of kids that we have to fight and fight anybody who tries to ever take them away from us again. We have to fight them. We have to fight them. We have to fight them on the beaches, on the shoreline, in the forests, in the fields, and we have to fight them till hell freezes over, and then we have to fight them on the ice and never stop fighting. And if we have to, we're going to die with our boots on. And that's what it means to be American. And so thank you for that question.
Hi, Bobby. I just saw your video on baby boomers. I'm 66 years old. However, I do have a 7-year-old daughter. What kind of world am I going to leave her?
Well, I worry about that. I have 7 kids of my own, and I have grandchildren, and I really worry about the kind of world that they're going to grow up in, and particularly with the emergence of AI technology, of bioweapons, and when those two things are married to each other, of these, the unleashed bioweapons research that's happening all over the globe right now, and then just the infringement on our constitutional rights and the devolution of America from the world's exemplary democracy into a surveillance state, into a police state. It worries me a lot. We have a government that enables this corrupt merger of state and corporate power we're seeing in our government, and a government that just never stops lying to the American people. And that, I think, is where we can begin by changing things. And the day that I get into office, I'm going to issue an executive order that any federal government official that lies to the American public in conjunction with his duties will immediately lose his job. And I'm going to ban the CIA, the NSA, and the intelligence agencies from censoring or propagandizing the American public. And I'm going to begin by going back to our traditional values, by teaching civics in class and teaching everybody what the American Constitution means and why we can never take those rights again away from people. And then I'm going to, end the chronic disease epidemic. 60% of our kids are now sick. We're the sickest country in the world. No other country has this level of chronic disease. And when my uncle was president, 6% of Americans had chronic disease. Today, it's 60%. Juvenile diabetes, when I was a kid, a typical pediatrician would see 1 case in his lifetime. Today, 1 out of every 3 kids who walks through his office door has diabetes or pre-diabetic. Autism rates have gone from 1 in 10,000 in my generation, 70-year-old men, to 1 in every 34 kids, 1 in every 22 boys. Nobody's asking why this is happening. We see, all these allergies, food allergies, peanut allergies, eczema, asthma suddenly appeared in around 1989. And neurological injuries, ADD, ADHD, speech delay, language delay, tics, Tourette syndrome, narcolepsy, ASD, autism, suddenly exploded around 1989. And all the autoimmune diseases, rheumatoid arthritis, juvenile diabetes, Crohn's disease, lupus, all these exotic diseases. It's hard to find a kid today that is not afflicted. And this doesn't happen in other countries. It's only here. And it's because we're poisoning them with our food supply. There's 1,000 ingredients in our food that are illegal in Europe. We've got all these pesticides, the PFOAs, the neonicotinoids, the atrazine, the glyphosate. And the high fructose corn syrup, which are just, American products that are here. And we are mass poisoning this generation. Obesity has gone from 13% when my uncle was president to 42% today. And, I want to end that. I want to end that chronic disease epidemic. I'm going to identify the exposures that are causing it. I'm going to eliminate them. I know how to do that. And you do it with good science, and then you give it to the lawyers to litigate, and they'll be gone quickly. And we will have our healthy kids back again. And that's where we need to start.
I'm Lori from Georgia. I have 9 grands. This is what's important to me. I don't want you to close down baseball fields or parks or wearing masks.
I love that kid. Yeah, I'm not gonna. I will guarantee you there will be no lockdowns on my watch. We're going to, if there is an epidemic, and I'm going to put an end to bioweapons research and gain of function research around the globe. We did it once in 1973. Nixon did it, and then after 2001, we reopened it again with the Patriot Act. We reopened the bioweapons arms race, and I'm going to end it. And but we don't. I'm going to admit it. If there's pandemics during my watch, we're going to administer them as public health emergencies, not as opportunities to clamp down totalitarian control and shift wealth upward. We closed 3.3 million businesses through lockdowns that should have never happened. Every pandemic protocol that's been written for 50 years has said you never lock down the public. You isolate the sick, you protect the vulnerable, but you keep society moving and going, because you're going to kill more people with the lockdowns. And we saw this extraordinary damage that we did to our kids, to our small businesses, to our values as a country, to our constitutional rights. And I will never allow that to happen. And I don't think either of these presidents can say that. President Biden is all for the lockdowns, and including the schools. Our kids lost 22 IQ points, according to the Brown University study. You have all these kids now with developmental delays and that need remedial education, a third of them all the way through for the rest of their lives. And it was a disaster, a catastrophe for our kids. And I will never do that. And, President Trump said he knew it was wrong, but he got rolled by his own bureaucrats. And we all suffered for that. So we need a president who's not going to get rolled. And that will never happen with me. And so thank you, everybody, for joining. Again, thank you for all those who sent questions. Let me know what you think in the comments. And please continue sending your feedback and questions to kennedy24.com/boomers4Kennedy. Thanks, everyone. May God bless you and your loved ones. And God bless America.